Alright, what I'm going to demonstrate today is how we can take an image and convert it into a new genre, and that genre being pictorialism. So what we know about the pictorialism movement was it was a series of photographers who began approaching a tool, photography, in a way that applied a more traditional artistic approach and a more artistic filter, if you will. They were seeking a softer, more painterly approach to a medium that was known for capturing reality and the natural world and rendering that in its entirety. So to alter that perspective, we can apply various filters in Photoshop and alter the feeling and connotation of this image. So to start with, we will begin by applying a filter that's an adjustment layer. Now the beauty of adjustment layers in Photoshop is that these layers are flexible. They don't alter the original data of the file, so that we can always go back and forth pushing and pulling information to round out that file so that we enjoy or appreciate what the final outcome is without damaging the original picture, if you will. So the first thing we'll do is by adding this black and white slider we have in Photoshop CS4, you're presented with this series of sliders that adjust the underlying color and pull out more or less detail. And you can slide these and you can see the effect taking place here as we alter these sliders, pulling them back and forth. So the idea is looking around the image, moving the sliders back and forth, and just getting a feel for what works for you, what pops, what doesn't pop, what recedes into the background, areas that you really want to draw more attention to. You can tell here that the yellow there's a lot of yellow in this image, and so it's affected drastically by dropping that yellow down. So I like that contrast level, I like that intensity. So I'm going to continue, and the next filter I'm going to apply is I'm actually going to add some vignetting around these edges to centralize the focus. So the first something I want to point out is when you're looking at an image, you want to first evaluate, what do I want this image to communicate? Now when you're on the scene and you're photographing it, you're probably thinking a lot of those things, but once you're back in your studio, you also have the opportunity to inject more meaning into the work. So it starts by first evaluating. It's not just about applying techniques. It's really about understanding what you want to convey to your viewers. And knowing that we want to convey some sense of pictorialism in this image, I start by evaluating, and I realize that there's no real central point of focus. It looked more natural and realistic, and I want to alter that by selecting the brush tool, starting with a rather large brush. You can decrease and increase brush size with the left and right bracket of your keyboard. I'm going to use a soft brush. Holding down the Shift key, I can increase and decrease the softness of that brush. Using a black color in my color well, I'm just going to start with a relatively low opacity and just paint in some darkness around these edges. So you can build this up, and that's the nice thing about using a light opacity, is that you can really kind of build that up slowly. And that's the idea, is you don't want to just come in with a lot of harsh color right off the bat. You really want to be able to control that. So just add to it. I'm going to increase the opacity a little, just hitting the 2 and just adding some sort of darkness up here in the sky and just really kind of building in those corners. So you can already see it's starting to take on a very different feel. Now we're just doing this quickly. You could add texture to that sky. You could bring in a scanned image of a burned sheet of paper. You have a lot of options. And if for some reason you feel like you've taken this image too far, hitting the X key will switch from black to white, and you can start to kind of paint back in some of the lighter colors depending on what you're looking to do. Okay, so the next step is applying a bit more control or a bit more contrast and kind of really kind of aging this photo a bit more. So I'm actually going to apply a filter that alters the focus. And so the way you do that is by first of this original layer. So I'm just going to hit the Command J key, drop that down below the layer. We'll call this layer blur. And then we're going to turn off our uppermost, the layer above it, so that we can see what we're doing. Go to Filter, down to Blur, Gaussian Blur, And then let's take a look at, that's pretty good. You can dial that slider back and forth to kind of get a blur and realize that we're just looking at how this is affecting the whole image, but we're going to go back in and control what areas are blurred here in a minute. So I like that. I like that right about 7 or so. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to reactivate or turn on the eyeball icon for my layer above it, my original layer. I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to click this little icon in the bottom of my layer palette. It's going to add a white mask. And now what do we know about masks? Well, we know that white reveals and black conceals. So that means if you paint black on your layer mask, it's going to conceal areas of that layer and reveal what's beneath it. So painting black conceals and white reveals. So with the black swatch in my color well and a relatively large brush with a soft edge, I can come in here and just add a blurry, I can let some of that blurry layer from below show through. Now it's subtle because I have my opacity turned down to 20%, but if I jack that up to about 50%, you can start to see, notice how that's starting to blur right down there in the foreground, and we're really isolating the focus right here in the central area. So I can come up here and I can blur this sky to soften that a little. You can blur out some of those trees, some of these outer fringes here, and we're just going to control and isolate that focus right in this middle area. Now I don't like that that central point is totally in focus. We know about pictorialism, all of those images were entirely kind of blurry. So let's drop our opacity back down to 10%. I'm hitting the 1 on my keyboard. And I'm just going to brush over that area just to soften that whole area up. There we go. Okay. And if you don't like that, or if you've gone too far, again, hitting the X key brings the white back. So you're now painting white on the layer. So again, you're now concealing the layer below it, or removing that layer mask in those areas. All right. So the last step, or the second to last step, actually, is I'm going to add a new adjustment layer, and that adjustment layer being a curves adjustment layer, because I want to add an S curve to this image that really shifts the contrast and just really separates those lights from the darks and gives us a pretty harsh image. We started with that image and we ended with that image. So pictorialism, we know, is about softening the image. It's about kind of approaching photography from a more painterly, pictorialist perspective. And we know that we should first evaluate our image, realizing what the potential is, what we're trying to communicate, and then start applying our techniques. Let's not let the techniques drive our image making process. I think it's important to let the tools be tools, but remember that it's your ideas, your personality, the character that you bring to the work that's going to make this work really stand out.